Good afternoon. I have a couple questions in the queue to start, and if you have more at any point, you can put them in the chat or send them in, and we'll be glad to try to answer them. I'm here to provide advice and counsel and mentorship to help everyone improve, and that's our mission statement: having fun, improving each day. And mine should be having incredible fun and improving each day because I get to be the leader of the fun part, and that is changing lives. The questions in the queue today to start, number one is on a scale of 1 to 10, how supportive should your spouse be in your attempt in your business? And boy, that's pretty clear that if if your spouse isn't at least a 7 or 8, it's going to cause problems. I've seen so many people, so many couples split up because of the constant bickering or fighting or problems that have occurred when someone opens a business and the other person doesn't agree with it. And inevitably, in every business, in every life, in every situation, you're going to face adversity, and you're gonna have problems. And boy, is it a lot better to have a spouse that is by your side to address those problems than it is to have one saying, "I told you so. I told you so. You shouldn't have done that." So yeah, I would be very cautious about your starting something that you're changing your life in such a dramatic way, becoming self-employed and acquiring a business without significant spouse support. Now, occasion I've seen the spouse come around. I've seen a spouse that was somewhat concerned or reluctant or not a believer. I've seen them turn around, and but generally it's going to cause huge problems and often lead to divorce, separation, and all of those problems. And so that's my position on spousal support for starting a business. Or the second one is, what about getting a spouse involved? Well, that can go either way. I've seen a lot of divorces from people that were in business together. You have to be careful. It's sort of like with raising children. It's so much better if you both have the same philosophy in the amount of discipline that children need, and that you're not arguing about that. So you, at the same point, if you're in business, then you have to have the same view of how to treat customers, how to treat, and more importantly, how to treat employees. I've seen situations where the spouse is feels differently about certain employees than each of them feel differently about a certain employee. And what happens is virtually always one spouse has a higher role in the company, maybe CEO, another one's president or some other title. And the person that is not negative towards an employee is considered to feel the same way as the other spouse, because it's hard to separate the spouses. So it can cause problem. It can cause difficulties, and it can cause difficulties at home. When you're in business with someone, and I was married and in business for over a decade, and all of your problems now, personal, and all of your communication and difficulties and issues are not just personal, but they're business. And so it's adds a further difficulty in a relationship. But I've seen it work where some couples have gone their whole lives, 20, 30, 40 years, happy to work together and happy to spend that much time together. I'm a bit of a loner, and I like some quiet time to myself. So it's and you can't. It's really difficult to get that if you have children and you work together all day. And uh, think about it: you vacation together, work together, everything. It's a it's it's not easy for everyone, but it's case by case. I would not say no never, and I would never say yes always. So it's somewhere between never and always. But each of you have to make that decision for yourself. But know this, that in that situation where you work together, there's more challenges than if you don't. There's good and bad, but it is challenging. So I want to continue to talk today about um, more detail of how we started Liberty Tax and some of the lessons I learned the uh, in that journey, and what we took from Jackson Hewitt when we left. After all, I was with Jackson Hewitt for 15 years, and I started with 6 offices, and when I left, we were up to a couple thousand offices, and um, and it was a $500 million company. And if you don't learn a lot in that 15-year journey, you're an idiot. I mean, there's all kinds of lessons we learned. So when I left, I had several of my executives raised their hand and said they wanted to come with me, and that was uh, Martha O'Gorman and Jack Seal and Donna Halligan, and they said, "We're done. We're not. We don't like the new culture, new regime. We want to go with you, John." So they came with me immediately. There was only other 2 that we considered. One my executive admin, Nancy Sutton. She was did a great job for us, and I asked her to leave, and she said she was young. She was probably 30-ish, and had just bought a new house and got a new dog. And so I remember taking her for coffee at Dunkin' Donuts and saying that she's welcome to come with us. And but I want what's best for her. And if she decides to stay, then God bless her. She had been in that job for 7 years, or she had been at the company for 7 years. And so at 30 years old, that was essentially her whole career. So actually, she ended up saying, I don't know, I don't recall if she's told me that day or the next day or later, that no, she couldn't. Because of her mortgage and because of her new expenses involving this dog, that she didn't want to take that chance and go with a whole new venture. And at that time, we hadn't decided what we were going to do, so the future was unclear. We had not acquired the Canadian company. We were looking for our next opportunity, and I'll get to that in a second. But we were unclear as to what our company was going to be, and we weren't certain we were going to get back in the tax business. I had a 3-year non-compete, and while we were considering Canada, there wasn't a lot of opportunity in the U.S. because we couldn't go within 25 miles of any Jackson Hewitt location, and they were in virtually every major market in the country. Out of the top 100 markets, they were in 97 or 98 of the top 100 markets in the country. So she didn't come along, and then Kathleen Curry, who was an attorney for us at Jackson Hewitt, she we had several attorneys, but she was attorney. She said she wanted to come with us, but she was going to wait. She would like to wait 1 year and continue to work at Jackson Hewitt and then come with us 1 year later, because of the uncertainty that where we were in building the company. And so in my separation agreement, in my non-compete, and my severance agreement, I couldn't compete for 3 years, and I couldn't solicit any one of my employees, except for I mentioned, we put in the agreement Jack, Martha, and Donna. And then also I put in the agreement Kathleen. And I said, Kathleen, if I put you in an agreement, you're going to be subject to possible abuse by the current management. They know you're leaving in a year, they're who knows how they're going to treat you. She said, no, that's fine. And so it worked out. She stayed a year, and then she came to work for us. So in the meantime, we were thinking of, we wanted to be in franchising. We knew we wanted to be in franchising, and we were looking at some small franchisors to acquire. I remember the only one that we got a little serious about was a carpet restoration company that they specialized when tenants moved out. They specialized in cleaning and coloring the carpet and making it look like new on apartments, mostly apartment complexes where tenants had moved out. And I don't remember the name of the chain, but I remember Martha and I went and visited them in their headquarters, and eventually didn't elect to go forward. I talked on a previous show about, at the same time we were negotiating we found a company in Canada which had about 100 locations, and called UNR Tax Depot. And we were negotiating to acquire them and start in Canada. And my non-compete didn't cover Canada because Jackson Hewitt never went to Canada, and still hasn't, in 2024, still hasn't gone to Canada. So now there's only two major players in Canada, unlike the US. But in Canada, there's just Liberty Tax and H&R Block. And so we did end up acquiring that company. And the way we got the name Liberty Tax is in Jack was an employee of the company and also was a franchisee. He was an employee of Jackson Hewitt, but he also was a franchisee in Las Vegas. And in that tax season, 1997, I didn't have any offices in the U.S. and I went to help him do marketing in his offices in Vegas. And I was driving down West Sahara Boulevard in Las Vegas on the way to Jack's offices, and there's this large Statue of Liberty, huge Statue of Liberty, about 40 or 50 feet tall. And I said to myself, wow, I don't know of any company or tax company called Liberty Tax. What a great name. And I bet you what great advertising. I bet you everyone within 15 or 20 miles of this location if you say by the Liberty statue, everyone knows. What an easy way to get name recognition. And people probably come in with their kids, and it's a replica of the real Statue of Liberty. And I bet you people come and take pictures with their kids in front of this Statue of Liberty. And I'd always been envious of, there are a few places in the country that people talk about that are known for miles and miles away. I think everyone in Atlanta, or almost everyone in Atlanta, knows the Big Chicken. And I've never gone and seen the Big Chicken, but I understand there's a chicken franchise that there's this on the roof is this Big Chicken. And I was envious of the easy way to get brand name in Atlanta for that business, because everyone would know it. So if we put up these Statue of Liberties around the country, think how quickly we could get name recognition. And so I immediately called I was on the road that day. I called the attorney and said, see if there's the trade name Liberty Tax is available. And if it is, get it. And then I called everyone and told them that I think we're going to call the new company Liberty Tax. Now, the interesting thing was that in Canada, that presented a dilemma because Canadians can be a bit anti-American in the sense that they're very territorial. I remember when I grew up in Buffalo, if you went into a grocery store in Canada, in the fruits and vegetables, they would put Canadian grown and American grown. So they're very territorial about doing business with America. And so the name Liberty obviously could be considered American. So we thought long and hard, and eventually we changed the name to Liberty and didn't see any repercussions or difficulty using the name Liberty Tax, except in Quebec. Quebec is you may remember Quebec tried to secede from Canada at one point. And so not only are they anti-American, they're apparently any English-speaking Canadians. So there was a little bit of pushback in Quebec, and as a result, Liberty never got a foothold in Quebec, and they still don't have good presence in Quebec, but they're coast to coast and a strong number two player in Canada. But the franchisor that we bought was more like a association of mom and pops than it was a franchise association. So they didn't have a system of doing business. They were again a bunch of independent mom and pops that we had to eventually half of them left, or more than half of them left, and we had to replace them with new franchisees with a new way of thinking and who would adhere to the Liberty system, which was the fastest growing while we were there. The fastest growing part of the Canadian tax system was Liberty. So, returning to the U.S., I don't talk about it a lot, but we wanted to test Liberty Tax in the U.S., and the largest city in the country where Liberty didn't have offices was in Columbus, Ohio. And generally like Columbus, Ohio, great blue collar city. We had done well. Jackson Hewitt had done well throughout the entire state and of course the country, but particularly well in Ohio. It's a great blue collar state. We were really successful in the Cleveland, Akron market, in Cincinnati, and so never gone to Columbus. Well, my non-compete had a weird phrasing, and it was phrased that I couldn't go into any. So I signed that in December of 1996. So it said I couldn't go into any area within 25 miles of a Jackson Hewitt office, or where I knew I had known of plans for them to open a Jackson Hewitt office. So, for example, if I was going to go in January of '97, and I knew that new franchisees were going to open in Columbus, then I couldn't have gone there. Well, we didn't open in 1997. We announced so my thinking of places I may have known where they were going to go, that expired at the end of the 97 tax season. So when I had signed the deal in 96 and stopped communicating with the company, then why would I know that they were going to open anything in 1998, a whole year later? Well, when we announced that we were going to open in Columbus, Ohio, and again, if you listen to stories of business. I mean, there's adversity after adversity. I mean, they will do anything to try to God puts up barriers that we have to face and overcome, and go around, overcome, go under, solve. We have to solve our adversity. But they, when we announced that we were going to open in Columbus, Ohio, we got promptly got a letter from Jackson Hewitt Corporate Counsel saying, we're going to sue you if you open in Columbus, Ohio. And by the way, when they sent this letter in July or August of 1997, they hadn't yet opened any offices in Ohio, but they were planning to open in 1998 Texas. So they were planning to open, but they hadn't opened yet. So we said, what are you talking about then? Because you, John Hewitt, knew that we were going to open in 1998 in Columbus, Ohio, back in December of 96. And I said, well, I didn't know. But however, if you can show anything in writing that you were going to open, if you send me anything in writing, email, letter, anything, by December of 96 that you were going to open in Columbus, Ohio, then in 1998, then we won't open. We will honor that my non-compete. And they came back and said, well, it's the CEO told you. What? So you're threatening to sue me because the CEO says that sometime before December of 96 that Jackson Hewitt in 1998 was going to open in Columbus, Ohio. I said, that's absurd. So we went ahead and opened, and I coincidentally, my favorite restaurant in Virginia Beach at that time, since the owner passed and it went out of business, but it was called La Chambord. And that was my favorite restaurant. I would go there about once or twice a week, and usually do my business entertaining there. Well, along in December of 1997, a couple of weeks before we're going to open, I went there with a couple of women, and turns out they had a back area with a separate parking lot that was having the Jackson Hewitt party. So I'm sure they thought that I was there at the restaurant just to cause some consternation, some upheaval, some disruption. So, but I didn't know that they were having it there, didn't think to inquire. So we were sitting there, and it was a quiet dining room with there were only a few tables, and there at the table comes the CEO of Jackson Hewitt, the guy that is allegedly going to sue me, and if we open in January, he's going to sue me. And I said, that this is December of 97, and we had just sold the company for $483 million. So that's a done deal. Company's been sold, and he sold the company for $483 million. And I don't talk about this a lot, but it was 2 to 3 times really what it was worth. He did an incredible job of convincing the buyers, Send It, that of the cross-marketing opportunity that were available, because Send It was a franchise system that had about 35 franchise chains. They had Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Days Inn, Avis. They were the biggest franchise group in the country. And he had convinced them that not only could we have their employees and customers do tax returns at Jackson Hewitt, but many of those franchises would become Jackson Hewitt franchises. And indeed, some of them did. The one guy bought from Century 21, who owned most of Minnesota. bought the entire state of Minnesota and opened like 60 stores, in most of them in his Century 21 locations. Well, it was a disaster. 2 years. It only took 2 years for him to go out of business, but it was a disaster, bad move. I wouldn't have recommended it. But I told him, you did, he said, thanks, John. You did, you built this great company, and, thanks for all you did. And he didn't accuse me of going in and disrupting the party. And so I said, you know what, Keith? I said, you did a great job of selling the company and building my stock. And I would hire you to sell my next. I would love to have you sell my next company. You're a great sales guy. And so we exchanged pleasantries for 5 minutes, and then he walked away. And I said to the people I was with, I said, maybe he won't sue me. Maybe he's not going to sue me. But sure enough, next month they sued me, and they had no evidence. It was just their only claim was that sometime by December of '96 he had told me that, and it was my word against his. And it's an absurd claim that he would. Why would we be talking in when we were arguing in late '96? Why would we be talking about opening in offices in Columbus, Ohio? We didn't talk about anything of consequence because we were at odds. He was not running the company the way I wanted him to run the company, and changing many things that I knew were the right path. So sure enough, they sued. They dropped the lawsuit a few months later. So it never came to life. But we opened in Columbus, Ohio, with 5 offices, and 4 of them were brand new offices. But I learned a valuable lesson we bought an office from a CPA in downtown Columbus, and she had a novel approach that I hadn't seen be so effective. She was doing 1,800 returns in this in a corner location downtown Columbus, Ohio, and which was the average H&R Block back then was doing about 1,500 tax returns. So she was bigger than the average H&R Block, and she was the only tax preparer. So we learned a valuable tool that's getting more and more important, because in today's tax preparation, it's harder and harder to find and keep quality preparers. So what she would do every year, she would hire college students as data entry clerks. And keep in mind, when you're doing 1,800 returns, that's a couple hundred a day that's over 20 a day during the tax season. And some days you're doing as many as 70 or 80. So because even the season is seasonal within the season, there's different rush periods during the season. So every year she would hire college interns, and she would walk around and finish the returns for the college interns. It reminded me of when I go to the doctor, I see a nurse first, and then they put me back in a room, and the nurse leaves, and in comes the doctor for their 10, 20 minutes typical visit. And I'm spending most of my time with the nurse. And so she leveraged herself. And to put that in perspective, most of you or many of you haven't been in the tax industry. The average taxpayer during a tax season does about 250 tax returns. The very best, not extraordinary, but to be in the top 90% of taxpayers in the country, you only need to do 600 or 700. Well, she was doing 1,800, an unheard of amount of business. So in the future, we started using that in areas where we were understaffed. We started using that doctor-nurse approach to solve the employee problem. And again, it's the employee problems we were having back 25 years ago pale in comparison to the employee. Virtually all industries are are suffering today for lack of quality employees. So it's a great way to leverage your best employees, that you sit them with someone who collects the data, the name and address and phone number and email address, et cetera, and inputs the W-2. And then the quality time comes down to an extraordinarily skilled individual. And so it's paid off, that just by acquiring that one business, it paid off immensely. 25 years later, it's still working in many locations. So they sued us, and now the next threatened suit came from H&R Block. And after the tax season of 1998, we only had about a half a dozen employees, and one of them was a franchise development salesman, but he was mostly selling in Canada because we had almost nothing available yet in the U.S. until we couldn't open until 2000 in the U.S. So we're still 2 years away from opening in the U.S. So, but we got a threatening letter from H&R Block, and it was from the chief counsel who was there when I had left many years before that. And so I knew him. And as a regional director with 250 offices at Block, we were involved with a couple of lawsuits. One was with the franchisee. Another was a situation where someone walking by in the sidewalk out in front of a storefront at H&R Block had tripped on the sidewalk. And so they sued. They weren't even coming into the block. So they sued the city, they sued the state, they sued H&R Block. And so I was involved with a couple of lawsuits with him. So I knew him a little bit. And he said, in the letter, it said, well, you are violating you are contacting our franchisees, and you know that's interference, that tortious interference, and you're not allowed to. They have a contract with us. You're not allowed to contact them, and we think that on our website we had claimed to be the fourth largest tax preparer, and they said, we think even if you count your Canadian offices, we don't think you're the fourth largest tax preparer. We don't think. And so in our meeting, we had our executive council. It's Kathleen, attorney, it's Donna, Jack, and Martha, and I showed him the letter, and I said, Kathleen, send this letter back. And it said, and call up call up the CEO, and tell him that I want to meet with him. And now we have 5 offices. They have 9,000 offices. We have 5 offices in Ohio and 100 in Canada. But and they have 9,000 US and 1,000 in Canada. And she says, he's never going to call back. So I bet her $1 that he would call back. And turns out he didn't call back, but he had the CFO, Ozzie Wennick, call back and set up a meeting. And I went and met him for the only time in October of 1998. I went, and Frank Salzoni, a great gentleman. And I'll tell you about that meeting in a minute. But and I said in the letter, I said, here's a letter to Steve that please see the attached letter or the attached memo we sent to the franchise sales staff. Now, the franchise sales staff was one person, right? But I said, please see the letter the attached letter that I sent to the franchise sales staff. And I said, please do not contact any H&R Block franchise. It violates, it's against the law. And anyway, most of them wouldn't meet our minimum requirements. So made fun. And then I said, Steve, I hope, it's been a long time. I hope you and your family are well. I haven't talked to you in a long time. But it's Steve, it seems to me like you should know who the fourth largest tax preparer is. Because remember, in the threatening letter they sent me, it said, we think you're not the fourth largest. Well, you're a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 company, and you're in the tax preparation business. Shouldn't you know who the fourth largest tax preparation business is? Again, I teased them, needled them, and sure enough, Ozzy called back. Kathleen set up the meeting, and I was going. I forget where I was. Oh, I think I was going to Hawaii for the only time I've been to Hawaii in that October. So I flew to Kansas City and had lunch with Frank Salzoni, and then I flew to Los Angeles, spent the night, and flew to Hawaii the next day. And because that Jackson Hewitt didn't have any offices in Hawaii, so that was, and what a great opportunity to visit Hawaii and have a business expense. But in any event, so never got an answer to our letter, except I went out and met with Frank, and great guy, again, a great gentleman. He had been never been in the tax business. What had happened is Tom Block had left the company suddenly because of the horrible tax season I talked about in 1995. He even left during the tax season, April 9th. So there were no more blocks at H&R Block. And they hired a guy who didn't last 1 year. He lasted 1 year and left. And so they picked Frank Salzoni off the board to be interim CEO looking for a new CEO. Well, he knew nothing about tax, and he had been 30 years in the airline industry. I don't remember the first 15, but the last 15 were with US Air. For those of you that are old enough to remember US Air, he had been with US Air, and he said to me one of the stupidest things that I've ever heard. He said, John, my goal is to do something with these offices the rest of the year. And I said to myself, that is so stupid. And it's in a, if you don't know the industry or you're not thoughtful, it doesn't sound stupid. It sounds like, what a genius thought, that we have these 9,000 offices and 700 were in Sears, but the others are storefronts that have 8 months where there's no activity. Almost, so we have 6 or 7 or 8,000 offices with no activity. Seems like we should be able to do something the rest of the year. And the reason it's stupid is Frank, do you think you're the first person that ever thought of that? Do you think that Henry Block and Richard Block and Tom Block and John Hewitt and the 100,000 Block preparers and the 20,000 Jackson Hewitt preparers and all the 250,000 mom and pops, you think no one ever thought maybe there's something we could do the rest of the year? That's silly. And that's silly beyond belief. But way worse, Frank, don't you think we've tried everything we could try? Everything that you could put in an office has been tried. And I've either participated in tests with other businesses, or I've seen them, and I've seen them fail. The only thing that's worked extremely well or the best of combining in offices is insurance, auto insurance specifically, and secondly, some offices do accounting, and that's a perfect fit. But most of the taxpayers aren't accountants and don't do bookkeeping or even like it, or even want to be bothered with it. They're happy making money from tax. So I can tell you some of the most bizarre things that we've tried over the years. When I was with a Block manager in Elmira, New York in 1975, one of my franchisees 30 miles away in Sayre, Pennsylvania, they were an H&R Block franchisee, and they also owned a towel and bath shop. So when during the year round, there was a towel and bath shop. And then during the tax season, you would walk to the end, through the store all the way to the back, and there was a couple H&R Block desks. So we had tried Talon Back in Canada, just north of, between Edmonton and Calgary. There was a franchise in a mall at Liberty who had, the husband owned a pet store and the wife owned a Liberty. And so you walk in and you hear the birds chirping and puppies barking, and you, over on the right is the tax side, and over on the left is the pet store. So we've tried everything we can think of. And sure enough, that day, I was headed to Los Angeles for my Hawaii trip. He was headed up to Chicago, where he was signing up in 2 days, 2 big CBA firms. In one in Indianapolis and one in Chicago. He told me. He didn't tell me the names of them, but he said we're signing 2 deals, closing 2 deals in Chicago and Indianapolis. And he said, so what we're going to do is, it turns out in those 6 months, they became the 5th largest CPA firm. You know, we had our final 4 or 5, and they became the 5th largest with McGladrey Pullen. They bought, and a whole bunch of regional or accounting firms to roll up into McGladrey Pullen, which today I think is, or when they sold it back 15 years later, was 5th biggest CPA firm in the country. So they owned McGladrey Pullen, and that same next month they bought a stockbroker company, sort of a miniature Charles Schwab, called Oldie Discount, and they paid $800 million to buy a company called Oldie Discount, and they paid $800 million cash. And it was interesting. The stock market was so adverse to it. The stock went down $800 million in value that same day that they announced. So they paid $800 million in cash and lost $800 million in market cap at the same time. And they, over the years, they soon changed that to H&R Block Investments, which was horrible because your name can only mean one thing. Is it taxes or investment? Is it taxes or mortgage? And they also, around that time, bought a large mortgage company called Option One. And that caused them they were top 5 in the country, doing all the BC, the lower quality loans around the United States. And they got into so much trouble when they sold that. They had to sell it in the biggest recession of our lifetime in 2008-ish, sometime around there. And they got hammered. They sold Oldie Discount. From 1998 when they bought it to about 2012 when they sold it, they only had 1 quarter where they made a profit, and that was the final quarter. They lost money all those years, and the CBAs in McGladrey rebelled against them, and they sued H&R Block for separation, and they bought it back. The CBAs bought it back for them in about the same time they sold Oldie Discount, the future H&R Block Financial. And again, they had closed the mortgage business before that. So wrong idea. None of them helped the business. In the meantime, their market share in tax from the period of 1998 until they sold them in about 2012 went down from over 20% down to about 16%. So they were losing market share in tax during that same period. And they had, in 2008 and 2009, they had the worst years ever. They lost 1 million returns a year. And today they're doing about 12 million tax returns. So they haven't been run well. And they average a new CEO every 2 years. And none of them know the tax industry. So they all come in with their ideas, like Frank Salzoni, they think are novel ideas, but tried and failed. And that's one of the things you get when you build successful businesses, and that you get the experience of all the failures, not only your own, but you watch your competitors. So we weather that. They don't sue us, and we don't bring in any H&R Block franchises. We didn't want them, and we start now in 2000. We announced we're starting in Virginia Beach, and so in 1999 we had gone from 5 offices in Columbus, Ohio, to 35 offices in 7 cities. And our best city was in Bristol, Johnson City, Tennessee area. Columbus was doing well. We had small offices in spots that were more than 25 miles away from Jackson Hewitt offices. So we have 35 offices. We're coming back to the United States. And now H&R Block attacks again. This time, there was a loan back then that it cost about $50. And if you had a $1,500 refund, you could get it within a day, about a day, for about $50. But H&R Block, trying to put John Hewitt out of business and Liberty Tax out of business, and me, they say I'm a shameless self-promoter. Truthfully, and admittedly, I am a shameless self-promoter. And I said, we're gonna come to Virginia Beach. We're gonna take no prisoners. And not only am I going to beat up on H&R Block, I'm going to beat up on my own name, my own software, my own system, my own people. We're going to be the fastest growing in the country, and certainly we're going to start with Virginia Beach, where my name is much more. Jackson Hewitt's a national name, but nationally it only has about a 60% of market that people know who Jackson Hewitt is. In Virginia Beach, it's 80% people know who Jackson Hewitt is. So what they did is they decided to do a test to do the loan for free in Virginia Beach. So we were charging $50 and they were charging nothing. And we were a brand new startup. They were just trying to put us out of business. And they made the mistake of, they said, they advertised no extra cost to get your money in the same day. And one day, to get it in one day, and spend more time with your refund. And they, for nothing, they didn't charge anything, but they made the mistake of, it was still a loan. You still had to sign a document that you would pay the money back if the IRS didn't issue the refund. If they and sometimes they don't because of back taxes or child support or student loans. They held those from refunds, and so if it wasn't paid back, not only did you have to pay back the $1,500, but you had to pay interest and penalty. And so it was like a loan; it just didn't have a fee. So we sued them, and I've been involved in my career in maybe 100 lawsuits. And my attorney told me long ago, the more successful you are, the more you're going to get sued. And we sued H&R Block. It's the only time we ever won. The only time where we ever got cash. Most of the other times, the only people that get paid are attorneys. And there's no cash, virtually no cash changes hands. But in this case, they lost. And between the penalty for false advertising, the judge said it was great in court. The judge said, and before he ruled, he said he was questioning one of the witnesses, the vice presidents from Kansas City who had come in to testify, and he said, "Is it a refund or a loan? Is it a refund or a loan?" And he said, he kept saying refund, and then finally he said, "No, it's a loan." And so the judge said, "So it's spend more time with your loan. It's spend more time with your loan. It's spend more." He said it like 3 times. So it's clear he was on our side, that it was a loan, and they didn't give the proper disclosure. You have to give when you have a loan, you have to give disclosure with APR and all of that in order for it to be legal. So we won attorney fees, and we won a penalty. So we won about $1 million cash from Sue and H&R Block. And our in-house attorney, Carl Khalil, who had never had a federal case. I mean, he's had he had some franchise cases. He'd only been with me and a startup attorney in franchising about 10 years, 8 or 10 years, but he had been with me at Jackson Hewitt and then joined me at Liberty. But he won, and we got $1 million in cash from H&R Block. I said so often, just another day of the week when I say thank you, H&R Block. I feel like thanking them every day, if not, I mean, at least every week, if not every day. And now Jackson Hewitt and now Liberty they continue to make my competitive life a joy and easy to pick on them. So that lawsuit happened, and during that time also we had a meeting, Martha and Jack or I in October of '98 we were in San Diego, and we went to the I think it's called Old Mexico or Old Mexico City, Old Mexico. And there's an area of San Diego that's a bunch of Mexican shops and restaurants. And we sat down and said, what are the 10 things we're going to do different? And that's where we came up with, and remember the second biggest mistake that I made at Jackson Hewitt, and I'm about to tell you the largest mistake I ever made, but the second was that we didn't start out franchising right away. It took us 3 years before we had 3 seasons before we sold the first franchise. Big mistake. And so we're going to start franchising from the get-go. Secondly, you heard what happened with the fighting at the end of my career at Jackson Hewitt. Said, John Hewitt, I'm going to have controlling shares. I'm not going to face that again, face someone taking over the company when me not being able to stop my company. And so we came up these top 10 on the back of the napkin. Of course, still have the back of the napkin top 10. And incidentally, when we started Loyalty 5 years ago, on anniversary of a 20-year anniversary, Jack and Martha and I went to a local Mexican restaurant and wrote our top 10. What are we going to do different this time? Because remember, not only do I have 15 years now, in 2018, when we started Loyalty, I had 15 years with Jackson Hewitt, but 20 years with Liberty. And so we knew a lot more. And so we came up with a new top 10. So if you come into my office in Virginia Beach, on the wall, it's framed. The napkin is framed with the 10 things we're going to do different. And Martha just commented that it was Old Town in San Diego. It's called Old Town, not Old Mexico. Old Town, San Diego. So the biggest mistake I ever made at Jackson Hewitt was not having a area representative program and kind of a master franchise where they had done that at H&R Block, the first franchise they sold. And when you sold franchises back in the 50s, there was no regulation. So there was no disclosure document. That didn't happen until 1980. So they had expanded their first expansion out of Kansas City was opening in Manhattan, and it failed. And so they sold the whole borough of Manhattan in about 1957. And then they sold Syracuse, and they sold Texas, and they sold Washington, and they began selling large areas of the country as to developers that would bring in sub-franchises, unit franchises. And so I had never done that at Jackson Hewitt. And what my incorrect thinking was that my biggest problem is people not listening to me. And if I put someone between me and the unit franchisee, they're even less likely to listen. But one of my best sales guys ever at Jackson Hewitt, Mark Johnson, he had come over to Liberty, but he was burned out. He didn't enjoy he had brought in hundreds and hundreds of franchisees at Jackson Hewitt. He didn't enjoy that anymore. He wanted a bigger challenge. And so he came to me, and at that same restaurant, La Chambord, we had lunch. He said, John, motivate me, motivate me. And I said, Mark, motivation means from within. Now, I can't motivate you. You can only motivate yourself. But I said, I've been thinking that one of the things that H&R Block did that I didn't do at Jackson Hewitt was to sell these large master franchise area representative, we call them area representative territories. And they help us by bringing in new franchisees and providing operational support. They pay us and we split the franchise fees and the royalties with them. And in exchange for them being boots on the ground, giving us upfront cash and boots on the ground. And I said, I'd like to test that in part of the country. And I learned long ago that you don't want to roll out anything national. So we're going to pick these areas and we're going to test it. And tested it. It was the best thing that ever happened. The areas that were the parts of the country that had area representatives grew 50% faster than the part that were company owned, because now we had not a company employee anymore. We had a owner acting like an owner, developing their territory and supporting their franchise. And they were much more adamant, hardworking, better qualified than the average employee. They were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, often millions of dollars. I remember Chicago was sold for $3.5 million, and the state of New Jersey $3.5 million. So we're getting some highly talented people helping us support our on-the-ground franchisees in the country, and that was one of the major reasons. And so I quickly, after that test, expanded to the whole country, and that's one of the reasons that in 12 years at Jackson Hewitt, I only had 900 locations. In 12 years at Liberty, I had 4,000 locations. So we grew 4.5 times faster. And one of the major reasons by implementing the area representative program. So guess what I did at Loyalty Brands? Franchising from day one, area representative program from day one. So you have to learn the lessons. You have to overcome adversity, and that makes you stronger. And resilience, perseverance, key to success. And again, everyone's going to face adversity. And remember, my final comment is, remember the 10 most important 2-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. Have a great day, everyone.